Dear colleagues, welcome on behalf of the World Organization of United Cities and Local Governments to this Thinking Big meeting of the Town Hall on Trust and Government. To have a full experience of this session, we invite you to choose to see the speaker view in this Zoom so that you can see the whole realization. And now I will yield the floor to our Secretary General, Emilia Saiz, to kick off this Thinking Big meeting. Emilia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pablo and UCLG team for inviting us to Think Big. Thank you also for all the partners that are joining us here today. My task is to describe to you what the town hall process is in United Cities and local governments, and also to give you a few of the connections that we are going to be making, what the town hall process means to us within the framework of the rest of our strategic priorities and our policy making. The town hall process is a process of a structural dialogue that we started 1 year before our Congress in Durban in 2019. And that was building on the legacy of dialogue and interlocution that we had with civil society partners and other stakeholders during the SDGs process, but also the Habitat 3 process. We came to realize that many of the messages that we wanted to bring to the international community, many of our policy priorities were much stronger if we consolidated that with them, if we were going to the international community aligned. And that's how the town hall process started, with a small group of partners that helped us develop position papers from their perspective so that we could take that on board in our policy making and in the work plan of the organization. And I am so happy we did that, not only because it was a success in 2019 in our Congress in Durban, eThekwini, but also because it actually allowed us to create a very robust community that is helping us to think, and that has proven to be really precious in the very critical moment that we are going through together. You know, when the world stopped in 2020, when we had to look around and realize that we were all in our houses, those that were lucky, we continued working, others saw their jobs go. In that very moment, we realized that liaising with this community and talking about what was there to come and how some of the agenda issues that we had been promoting were relevant for that very moment was critical for the survival of our organization, for the learning processes of our constituency, of our members, and for consolidating a future agenda. And the future agenda and the need for transformation is what we hope the conversations of these town halls are going to be able to shape. We realize that we are at a moment in history where whatever we do has a great effect for future generations. We're finding the balance between the current needs and those of future generations is extremely difficult and critical. But we also realize that how we relate to people, to planet, and to governments probably needs to go into deep transformation. If we want sustainability not to be about survival, but about quality of life. If we want the role of local and regional governments to go beyond an administrative role as implementer of policies, but actually safeguarding ambitions and dreams of communities, a true political role, then we need to work together towards a new social contract. Within the framework of this strong agenda that we have been that we have constructed for the world, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, they are probably still very valid as framework, taking into account the other global agendas as the Paris agreements, but going a little bit deeper in how we construct the relationship. So that new social contract, from our perspective, could be defined in a pact for the future, that for the global municipal movement will be the next strategic priorities. And we hope that the discussions here are going to help us address some of the critical issues, some of the critical components of that compact, of this new global contract that we need to develop. We have been talking in the town hall about the commons, redefining the commons to redefine service provision. We will be talking about addressing the climate emergency and components like culture. How big of a role do they need to play? We will be talking about shifting from service provision to care and how that transformation will need to play in society. But of course, we represent a very concrete constituency, local and regional governments globally, over 250,000 members. We need to address the issue of trust, of democratic renewal, and what it implies to be government at this moment, and to address the link between government and governance to these co-creation spaces also with communities. So this is the challenge that this town hall needs to tackle, and in order to do that, we have very important partners that will be introduced to you very soon. And we want to do this exercise with a leading partner for us, the Global Assembly the General Assembly of Partners, that has walked with us the whole process, has gone through the whole process of the Habitat 3 agenda. Defining the new urban agenda was very critical for us, the role that local and regional governments had to play in the international, local, and national sphere. A very diverse group that is going to be working with us hand in hand to make sure that our legacy and our discussions during the Habitat 3 process are reflected here. But well, I would say that they also will try to push us to think further and hold us accountable for some of the transformations. And today, I would also say that we are counting on you to bring to the table issues that might not be so easy for our constituency, to bring new aspects that we might not have been discussing before. And I am very happy to have with us Maria Fernandez Pinoza and Philip Roth that are going to give some initial thoughts about the role that local and regional governments should be playing in a much more holistic governance structure at international level on the one hand, and also some of the thoughts that we have been able to gather and develop when thinking about what it means to govern in emergency. We have more and more emergencies. What do we need to consider actually to shape government and governance in this context? So this is how we plan to set the scene. There will be an open floor that is going to be led by Jeannie. But before giving the floor to the inspiring talks and to the views of the leading organization, GAP, I would like to invite Pablo Fernandez from my team. You know, Pablo is my chief of staff, and he's the focal point for this particular town hall. He will introduce the process of the town hall, right, Pablo, just to have all the same level of information and so that you know how we are planning this process to look like. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Emilia. And as you were saying, I'm going to introduce a process where we come from and where we are going with this specific town hall and the others. As you know, this town hall is one of 4 town halls that UCLG has. Emilia was referring to them before. We have the Global Commons, the town hall, this one, Trust and Government. We have the one on climate and culture and one on caring systems. We come from a first generation of town halls that shaped together with our membership the Durban Political Declaration, which was our political strategy from the last Congress. This is where we come from. And where are we going is to the Pact for the Future that Emilia was referring, and as well the future agenda of the United Nations that was written by the Secretary General in the common agenda that he presented last September. So this is the documents that will guide us through, and this is the ones that we are pointing to, the Pact for the Future and the common agenda. This is all envisaged in the Cities Are Listening strategy that Emilia was referring as well. So we have the 4 town halls with their leading organizations. Each of the town halls has representatives from caucuses. We have the Youth Caucus, the Feminist Caucus, and the Accessibility Caucus. Today we have representatives from each of the caucuses. They are full members of each of the town halls. But what they will be doing is leading these cross-cutting agendas and producing a standalone document as well during our Congress. What we are expecting from each of the town halls is a co-creation process, which includes these meetings, our retreat, field visits, and then an online discussion in our UCLG Meets platform. This co-creation process will lead to specific policy papers with recommendations to our membership of local and regional governments. This will land through our governing bodies and our consultation mechanisms, the policy councils, the different commissions, and finally to our World Council. This will be adopted, or not, ideally it will, by our membership, and it will shape our strategy for the coming 3 years. I will go through the other town halls so that you know who else will be present here. For the Global Commons, it is the global platform for the right to the city who is leading it, and different stakeholders that will be adding to the discussions. As you know, here we have the General Assembly of Partners leading the town hall. We have Fixed Africa, represented today by Barbara Holtman, Open Government Partnerships, represented today by Rudy Bergman, and Idea International by Alberto Fernandez. And finally, an additional thing that we have done this year is having international partners being involved. Today, we will have UN Habitat. Then we have Caring Systems, led by Cities Alliance, and Climate and Culture, led by the Climate Heritage Network. These 2 town halls will be meeting next week. Finally, we have the caucuses, which I already referred to, with long-standing partners, World Enabled and the Huayru Commission, and our new strategy. We have had mandate to engage with youth groups and youth constituencies for a while, but it is only until now that we are doing it in a structural way. So we are really excited to welcome the Youth Caucus. As you have seen, all leading organizations and most of the partners, they represent constituencies. They represent internationally organized constituencies. So this is our proposal. It is flexible, and each of the town halls will be self-organized. Today, Ginny will be leading the way you will organize, but this is in a nutshell what we are expecting from this town hall. We have the Thinking Big meeting for each of the town halls. Then we will have an all town halls meeting during our retreat, which ideally you can be there physically, but it will also be we will also have the possibility to do it online. We will have deep dive visits where you will be able to meet each other and to meet our membership in the field, doing their job, being mayors in their offices, in their territories. And finally, we will have the co-creation online process, which will be, as I said before, in our UCLG meets. But Ginny, colleagues, feel free to have informal meetings before our retreat. Feel free to have different fora in our platform to start discussing. And more than this, feel free to invite anyone you want and anyone you think it's interesting to be added to these discussions. So this is where we are. This is what we are expecting from each of the town halls, Emilia, and I'm happy from the UCLG Secretariat to facilitate in any way we can. Thank you, Emilia.
Thank you very much, Pablo. As Pablo was saying, look, this is a co-creation process, and we of course want to make sure that you have as many contacts as you want with each other. We want to make sure and guarantee that we give you the framework to exchange. We'll be opening also an interactive space where you will be able to exchange documents and to be in contact with each other. It is within our interactive platform, UCLG Meets. But feel free to self-organize in a different manner. We want to guarantee that you meet each other, and we are promising that we will ensure that your reflections and your recommendations reach our political leadership. And I'm almost sure that it will land in our work plan. So that's our mandate, and I think that it will really strengthen the capacity of the municipal movement, but also of local and regional leaders to act. So having said that, and with this framework, Jeannie, some thoughts on how you see this town hall working? You were, of course, in our previous exercise. Thank you very much for representing the General Assembly of Partners here. I know that many of our members are also joining us today. Jeannie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and thank you for initiating this wonderful process. We really support and are excited about the opportunity to work with you on this, having had the previous experience in Durban, where we supplied work on multi-stakeholder partnerships, and within that thought about principles to guide those. And we see this as the next step, and a very important step in thinking about how we can provide and work for trust in government. This edition is so much more elaborate and so much more inclusive. I think it's going to be extremely successful because of the lessons learned from the last time, and also from the ability to spread the word more widely throughout the world. As you know, I represent GAP, which is composed of 17 partner constituent groups representing different stakeholder groups with an interest in sustainable urban development. And we are really happy with the topic that you have assigned to us, trust in government. I see many of the members are here in this discussion. I can see you on the screen, so hopefully you'll contribute later to this. We feel this topic is so important, not only for its timeliness, but also for its overall importance for the growth of societal well-being and for the global municipal movement. So why is trust important? Obviously, it's important for the day-to-day governing of our world, but also it's important for making needed changes in our government and how we do work, particularly as we approach the long-term global megatrends, those of public health, which we are experiencing right now, as we well know, climate change, inequality, public finance, and promoting prosperity. So what is trust, and what are we talking about? We're talking about basically two things, two drivers that inform it. First is competence. Does government have the competence to provide the public services and anticipate the needs of the future of its citizens? And this is based on responsiveness and reliability. How responsive is local government, national government, regional government, and how reliable is it? And values. The principles of integrity, openness, and fairness are at the basis of all trust in government. And the COVID crisis has certainly heightened these concerns, but we obviously are dealing with other crises as well. And when we talk about trust, we talk about government, we talk about stakeholders, and we talk about citizens. But within government, government is not one single thing. Government has many, many elements. On one hand, within government, you have elected or appointed leaders who change from time to time. You have civil service, who are more permanent workers in government. And trust is different among these different components, perhaps. This is one of the things that we will be looking at. We also will be looking at, as we go forward and thinking about trust, what the differences are among different groups of citizens, by gender, by age, youth, elderly, income, education, race and ethnicity, urban, rural, regional.
Ginny, there is something moving there with your microphone and we cannot hear you very well. It is your
sorry.
microphone, I think.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Excuse me. So I was saying that when you think about trust, it's not a single thing, and that we need to pick it apart and understand the different components, both from the point of view of government and the different levels of government and the different people working in government, as well as the citizenry, and thinking about within the citizenry, the different components, whether it's components looked at by age, by gender, by race, ethnicity, by place, by location, residence, rural, urban, regional issues, education, income, all of these factor into the idea of trust. And we've seen, unfortunately, in the past decade, the rise of lower trust or mistrust. And why do we have that? We can pull this apart. We can think of some of the reasons why we have it. Perhaps it's because of financial insecurity. Perhaps it's because of perception of social disintegration and feeling disenfranchised. Perhaps it's the contextual situation in which we are all operating in. Maybe there are scandals, maybe there are crises that aren't well dealt with. And lastly, this issue of misinformation and what social media has done in either eroding or promoting trust. We have learned during the COVID crisis that there are certain things that enable trust. Primary among them is public participation. Public participation with citizens, with government, public participation in which there is a belief and an understanding of the particular problem we're facing. As I said, the COVID crisis, and I'm sure Philip will probably talk more about emergencies as we go forward, and perhaps Maria Fernanda as well. We could see, for example, when there was transparent and frequent and open communication among government leaders and the citizenry, trust built. We can see when there was a technical issue, when experts were brought, trusted experts were brought into the discussion, this enhanced our trust. I'm thinking here in the United States of the folk hero now, Dr. Fauci, who is actually the subject of Christmas decorations, posters, and is a well-believed expert around this topic. And lastly, high ethical standards are absolutely necessary on both sides. High ethical standards so that all of the transactions that occur are believable and credible and so forth. So this is just touching the top of the iceberg when we talk about trust. And we are so excited to have our partners, City Open Government, Fixed, IDEA, UN Habitat, the Caucasus, and others. We really want you to join as we go forward and thinking about how to manage and build and write a policy paper that's going to have meaning for the global municipal movement, both from the point of view of global issues, but equally important for local issues from national down to municipal government. So I'd like to now say thank you to UCLG for creating this wonderful opportunity for our conversations, and to turn back, I believe, to Amelia, who introduced Maria Fernanda. And we look forward to this exciting challenge of getting our arms around government trust citizens.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. I think you have covered this very broad space that we will need to discuss about, and I found it very interesting that you started to talk about the truth or false news, and that you started to touch upon that space. Yesterday in the town hall on the Commons, we had Billy Cobbett, the former executive director of Cities Alliance, addressing the group. And he was saying that in order to talk and define new commons and build service provision around those commons, we needed to think about the role that we would have as municipal movement and as networks to defend the political space where actually truth could flourish and could be a part of governance. So I see already many issues that are connecting here. Before giving the floor to Maria Fernanda, allow me to change because of your inputs, Jeannie. I think it would be interesting to start with Philip. I hope, Maria Fernanda, you are okay with that. I would like to give the floor to Philip Road because we have been working with the London School of Economics on this governance emergency initiative, and together UCLG, Metropolis, and the London School. And we have been trying to gather information and to analyze how the governance is affected by the emergency context and how things are shifting in governments around the world, but in particular in local governments. And I think it will go very well with what Jeannie is saying, and then we will look at the broader picture about the international architecture that Maria Fernanda will address for us. So Philip, 5 minutes for you. Welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, and welcome from London, and a happy new year. I think we discussed earlier how important that is to constantly re-emphasize. So as Emilia already said, she wanted me to really tease out some of these insights from our emergency governance initiative, which makes use of the term emergency, obviously in the context of COVID, hopefully not much longer, but then also in relation to other what we call complex emergencies. And these are really these very long, very non-routine emergencies that in many instances may remain with us for some time. They're very political, and they are not just this one-off major disruption which everyone can see, but they are precisely the kind of emergencies which in the first instance require trust in experts and our political leaderships to appreciate that there is a crisis or indeed an emergency in the first instance, or to trust the people that may be out in the street to remind us that something is going wrong, that this is indeed a major crisis, and if the temporal component is being added, an emergency. So we treat these emergencies as contexts where we require responses that are radical and that are rapid. And both of those conditions actually have a degree of friction with due process and particularly with consensus building, which, as we've just heard from Jeannie, of course, are foundational elements of building trust. Now, I want to emphasize a bit more why cities and municipal governance matters. And I think in a lot of our arguments around devolution and decentralization, we have been putting forward arguments around competence and responsiveness. But I see in the context of COVID, the value-driven question actually being almost more important. So we need to really ask, what's the contribution of municipal governance to add to the value definition and the exchange? And here cities and regions are not just promising context for participation, but maybe more importantly for deliberation, which really adds to the participatory dimension a much more sort of interactive engagement, conversation, discussion, building on each other's argument, appreciating the evidence, and then putting forward ideas. And learning from cities which have been experimenting, not only because of COVID, but before on multiple accounts with new concepts, new approaches to deliberation, is so critical to then address the polarization which we are seeing in our societies, populism, misinformation, and then directly the lacking trust, and also to some degree the tension between technocracy, the efficiency of government, and then democracy. We should also appreciate that maybe particularly the large cities and the larger metropolitan regions, which are sort of these cosmopolitan, progressive, globalized microcosms, are influential enough to attract the attention beyond their boundary. So sometimes even national governments will listen if things happen in certain cities. They don't have to be maybe the biggest cities, but they need to be perceived at an international scale as thought leaders, and therefore become, through their soft power, incredibly influential when it comes also to trust building. And then finally, this is of course around the competence issue here, delivering change, positive change and outcomes, where I think it's easy to argue that we need to go beyond tested and well-trialed solutions and embrace experiments at a much bigger scale than what we have seen so far. And many have argued in political science, but also in other disciplines, that cities have a particular condition where you can scale experiments, maybe better than in other contexts, to identify future pathways for social, cultural, ecological, political, and economic development. And at an age of uncertainty, these kind of experiments are critical. And still, of course, what we have seen through our own work on the Emergency Governance Initiative is that we are far from having even basic paradigms and sort of principles of emergency governance that can guide our way, but we are working with our partners at this very moment and through a longer process of engagement, teasing out some emerging principles. And I want to leave you with 4 of, in total, 10 principles we are working with at the moment, which are directly connected to this issue of trust building. I mentioned before, emergencies confront us with rapid and radical responses, and they can very quickly lead to quite regressive and also discriminatory practices. And putting sort of human rights and social justice back at the center when we're dealing with these emergencies must be a first important paradigm. A second one is about exploring new forms of democratic legitimacy when we are responding to those complex emergencies. And this requires, once again, real experimentation with new forms of deliberation, not just participation, and maybe sort of emergency assemblies, citizen juries. I mean, there are a whole range of ideas being often re-identified. They have been around for some time, but they have been scaled during the recent series of crises, and there's some really good and hopeful insight. Conventional command and control structures don't cut it, and we have been trying to reframe some of these quite contemporary discussions around also a more feminist approach to governance through an ideal of governance by empathy, a real emotional connection with citizens in our cities and regions by governments that rather than instead with a cold hand, deal with situations with a warm heart. And we'll be really keen to hear more about the good practices that are emerging out of that perspective. And then finally, directly on trust, with this an issue we identified early on, utilizing the existing trust that is still there and work with trusted institutions, help them to remain trusted institutions. That is so important in the first instance. Critical about this is the truth telling and getting back to how we engage with truth as a term itself, and deal with questions of how can we bring about social proof around an emergency which the normal person cannot perceive? How can we create a new social proof that our climate is close to being a disaster for us all? It's very complicated. And finally, there's an unfortunate response paradox in emergencies. If we respond properly, we will never have the full emergency, and then citizens will say, well, you never were right about this anyway. If we're aware about these issues and paradoxes up front, we can help a lot with building the trust very slowly over time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Philip, for bringing this issue forward, and you will see that some of the findings that we have been gathering are starting to influence the way that we organize the priorities in UCLG, with feminism, municipalism as one of them. Clearly, but also I think it is extremely important to find this new legitimacy and new representation going from participation to deliberation. I think will be very critical issues to look at in this town hall. And if you allow me just some food for thought, as we go forward, I think how we include the representation of the future generations, those that are not here yet, how will they be represented in future governance structure? I think is becoming more and more urgent for us to think about this. I really like the issue of truth coming up again and again. And as I go now to Maria Fernanda, in your role as Ubuntu advisor, but also as advisor of many global initiatives, including generation equality, including the universal healthcare movement, Maria Fernanda, the challenges that we are facing are greater than a single sphere of government or a single country or even region alone. So universality and the construction of global governance mechanisms among those trusted institutions, I think that Philippe was referring to. I think this plays also an important role. I think we will need to see how the municipal movement finds its way also to this global governance, and I hope that you can inspire us to think a bit about it. The floor is yours, however you want to use it for the next 5 to 7 minutes. Welcome, and thank you for being with us, Maria Fernanda.
Thank you, dear Emilia. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Jeannie and Philip and Paulo for inviting me to this Trust and Government Town Hall. And it's very exciting to know that that's the way you are preparing for Daejeon and building on the legacy of Durban as well. So the 4 themes and the 3 cross-cutting issues that you have identified cannot be more relevant. They are the defining issues as you said very well, Emilia, as we imagine and shaped renewed forms of government, of democracy, of governance. I am not going, it's hard not to repeat what we already heard, but you know, I'm not going to tell local leaders and authorities and mayors what you already know. We are living a time of emergency, a time like no other, marked by multifaceted and interconnected crises, from staggering inequalities and rising poverty to the climate emergency and what I would call an ecological collapse. And these crises translate into the daily lives of regular people, of citizens. And it's not because local and regional authorities and mayors, it's not because you have read a report or a newspaper. You know, as leaders, as public servants, you are living and experiencing the disenchantment of citizens and voters every day. And when people feel frustrated because they have to pay exorbitant amounts for health services or good quality education, when they lose their jobs and are completely unprotected because of the lack of safety nets and social security, or when millions of people have to flee from their homeland because of a drought, of a flood, of a hurricane, or a conflict for that matter. So what we already heard from Philip and Jeannie, insecurity, uncertainty, and fear are the characteristics of our societies. And in that, of course, weakens the trust of people in the institutions and governments that should provide, should serve and protect its citizens. And here I'm speaking about local governments, but also I'm speaking about international institutions and organizations, including the United Nations. But of course, also the first immediate space to turn to are local governments and authorities. So subsidiarity does not only work for planning or decision-making or service providing, but also it does work to voice dissatisfaction and frustration. I think, allow me to share very quickly a few numbers from the Edelman Trust Barometer of 2022, looking at 28 countries actually. And we see that government leaders and journalists are seen as the least trusted societal leaders today. government leaders with 42% average, journalists with 46% average. There is a collapse of trust in democracies. In many of the democracy studies, institutions are trusted by less than half of their people. And in the case of developed countries, in northern countries, basically, citizens believe that the future is going to be even worse in 5 years' time. So government is not seen as able to solve societal problems. 80% of the people are worried about job loss. 75% are worried about climate change. 67% think that their leaders are lying to them. So the truth comes to play once again. And if you allow me 2 words about Latin America, and not only because it's my region, because it is the region, according to the latest AIDB report on trust, is the region that trusts less other citizens, trusts less governments and democratic institutions. And we know that it is also the region with the highest inequality. So, and here, I would like to call your attention on the connection between inequalities and the trust deficit. I just let's look. Let's say a few numbers in Latin America. Governments are trusted by 27% in average by people. The judiciary 25%, parliaments 20%, and political parties 13%. This is really a tragedy when we're trying to build and imagine new forms of government and governance. So I would say how to transform these dystopian realities, how to build this new social contract where our commons, a stable climate, the care economy, intergenerational justice have a place, and using UCLG language, how to shape this new pact for the future. And that involves local governance, but also our common agenda and the UN reform process. So what to do? And the truth is that there is no straight answer. The collective task to address inequalities, poverty, exclusion is not only about income and jobs, it is about power and agency. We already said that before today. How to build social infrastructures for accountability, for transparency, new democratic designs at all scales. And that includes, once again, international organizations, the UN and its much needed reform process. And allow me just to close with just 4 headlines for us to discuss later. George Orwell said that during times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. So we need to do and to make the revolution of truth. I think that the importance of narrative and discourse, words matter. What we say do matter as political leaders, as civil servants. A very simple idea here for us and for politicians: do as you say and say what you can do. And I think this is critical. And with that, I would like to also mention the critical role of media and social media, the crisis of infodemics. I think that was already mentioned, and I think we should explore more that. Free speech should be responsible and accountable. The role of regulation, I think, is critical. And this is a discussion that does not have a straight answer, but needs to be discussed seriously. The number 2 headline: more citizenship and co-responsibility, a new social contract between citizens and governments for co-building new economies, new societies. Intergenerational and gender-sensitive power sharing is absolutely critical. Definitely, we need feminist leadership, more women in power. It's absolutely critical for trust building. And local and regional government spaces. This is the number 3 headline. I think that local and regional governments allow for new experiments in participatory democracy and deliberation. Local governments are perfect laboratories for inclusion, for subsidiarity, for challenging the current social order, but also for informing global decision-making, global trust building in multilateral institutions. In the number 4, in final headline, it is connected to restoring trust. It should not be an afterthought. It should be at the center of building back better. An explicit public policy, a part of the checklist, together, for example, with the ecological transition or the social protection nets or the care economy. And in this includes, of course, a multi-level, multi-scale efforts from communities to national governments to UN and multilateral international spaces. And here I have to say that I'm very much looking forward to the 10 principles that Philip mentioned. I think that this is the center of building better and newer societies. Trust has to be at the center of the Pact for the Future, of the new social contract. So our state of emergency, our code red in society and in our relationship between nature and between governments and citizens is telling us very clearly that there is no time for incremental change. We need spectacular transformation, courageous reimagination. And in this situation, I think indifference is simply not an option. And very much looking forward and regarding the next and upcoming town halls and how this intersects with climate, with commons, and with the 3 cross-cutting themes that you have defined. So thank you, and back to you, Emilia, Paulo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Maria Fernanda. Well, we promised in an inspiring setting the scene, and I think we did deliver. Thank you very much, Ginny, Philip, and Maria Fernanda, for these initial words. Very powerful notions about the need to dig deep also in how do you construct more citizenship, and are we able to continue with the notion of citizenship that is linked with nation states? Only the link between inequality and the trust deficit, I would dare say the democratic deficit that we are experiencing, is also extremely critical, and things that I hope this town hall will consider, and we will find it back as we circle back to the commons, but also caring societies. I am going to leave it in your hands now, Ginny, not without saying that a lot of the work that we have been doing together as organized constituencies with civil society in this permanent dialogue that we have, Cities Are Listening, can be found on an interactive platform where you can see the discussions that we have been having about many topics over this past 2 years of pandemic. So we invite you to check that out. It's going to be shared with you in the chat. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Global CAD. They have been helping us powering those platforms, and they will be accompanying this town hall process with Fernando Casado in a leading role. He is one of the founding fathers, I would say, of this town hall process, and was very involved in the town halls in Durban. I'm happy to confirm that he will be, his excellent team of Global CAD will be doing that with us this time around again. So with that said, Ginny, I think it's time for an open floor, and we will make sure that all the requests that are appearing in the chat are answered. The team is on it. We are not missing anything. Ginny, back to you.
Thank you very much. And what a wonderful morning so far. It's really been terrific. And I really do recommend you look in the chat because there's a lot of references that are being shared, which will go on a website for everybody's reference. But at any rate, stemming from this idea of competence and values, we've heard about emergencies and we've heard about the new principles. And I think we've just received the document that has those principles, so you can refer them. And Maria Fernanda, we asked for an inspiring talk, and boy, you sure hit a home run on that one. I must say, the idea that we should have a new social contract, that we need to have courageous imagination and indifference is not an option. Boy, you've really told us what we need to do here. So we've got a lovely panel of some observers who will contribute, in particular, our partners for this, as well as the youth caucuses. And by the way, I neglected to mention our fourth partner in this, of course, is UN Habitat, absolutely critical to thinking about trust in governments. So we have Rudy Borman, who's the lead of the Open Government Partnership group. We have Vivian Ogu-Corby, who's the Barcelona Youth Council. We have Barbara Hoffman from Fixed Africa, Chris Williams, Director of UN Habitat, Alberto Fernando Gibajas from IDEA, Sri Sofian from Waru, and also Luis Artieda for persons with disabilities. We have also at least 10 people from the General Assembly of Partners here in the audience, and I welcome them and urge them to speak up. But let's hear from our first partners and caucus leaders first. We'll turn to Rudy, please.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here, and couldn't agree more that we had a very inspirational morning to hear from the colleagues. OGP is glad to be part of this dialogue. We have been working from the last 10 years on experimenting in new ways to build up policy with citizens, with civil society at the table. I'm going to share with you later on a report we launched in December for our summit in Korea that resumes 10 years of experience, more than 4,000 commitment that had been created using this structure for co-creation that makes a co-creation a sort of public process from end to end into evaluation as well. And a lot of learnings, I think, that can be taken from national and local governments that are part of OGP there. I think the provocations at the beginning of the conversation are very much aligned to what we are seeing. Very interesting, the idea of, I couldn't agree more, the new approaches into deliberation. This is something that we cannot wait anymore to bring to the center everything that is happening at the urban innovation, civic labs, combined with more classic approaches to citizen participation that I think needs to be seen now as a skill building for organizations, for governments, for citizens, for civic education classes, etc., etc. I think we have a major opportunity there. And it's the local governments, the one that can really bring a real world experience, real world problems to the table. So I think the opportunity here, it's amazing. So not too much to else, super excited to be here. Thank you very much, Emilia, and all the team for bringing us in, and happy to be part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
We look forward to your report. Please put it in the chat because it will certainly contribute to our discussions. Vivian Ogu-Corby from the Barcelona Youth Council.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a quick question. Are we supposed just to introduce ourselves or also to express our visions and the questions that we were?
Well, please express your, obviously introduce yourself, but please express your vision.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. I'm Vivian Ogu, and I'm an envoy from the Youth Council of Barcelona. And also I'm involved in different international and national organizations from a youth perspective. And well, as I expressed in past meetings, I'm highly delighted to be here in the capacity of member of the town hall through the Youth Caucus. So well, the Youth Caucus, we've been debating among us what to bring today to this debate. And we've tried to answer in a trying to be concisely, but we try to answer your two questions, which are really, really interesting for us to devote time to. So for us, when speaking about what is relevant to talk about trust in government in the current international context, is that we've seen that like this context is both challenging and inspiring, and we believe it's especially important to talk about trust because we are living in a world that sees the rise of authoritarianism, growing international tensions, and more conflicts inside countries, polarization, but also violence. And for us, local governments and are key actors for ensuring inclusion and for keeping local conflicts low and to protect the well-being of citizens. We are also living through this technological revolution, a rapid, transformative, inspiring, but also sometimes perceived dangerous world that is now moving and happening at two different stages. On the one hand, at the real world, but also at the digital world. And while technology can have a great role in building new models of democracy that ensures participation and can improve the quality of life, we believe that it can be also it can also contribute to growing tensions between social groups with no real basis for it. So building trust while these global transformations happen is fundamental for maintaining the link between citizens and government and accompanying the citizens to be resilient and not suffer from these changes and advancing together towards these new levels of well-being. So for us, it's in conclusion, it's important to speak about trust, because if we want to advance to the utopia of peace that was envisioned by the international community, but not only a negative peace, but also this positive peace that means the well-being of citizens across the world, we need to create trust bidirectionally from the citizens to government and from governments to citizens. And well, this process involves all levels of governance, but especially local governments, whose importance are every day more recognized, from peace building and reducing inequalities, but also for ensuring quality education and all the necessary assets for making the citizens to become the change makers that can drive this change. And which are the major trends that characterize this topic? Well, we have realized that we are living in a very dichotomic era, and that we are seeing like, it seems that there are like antagonist processes that are happening at the same time. Like if if two different forces were fighting each other. Well, we are kind of entering this fourth wave of authoritarianism. We're seeing how democracy and inclusion is losing space in many countries. We're seeing corruption, coups d'état, massacres, but and also like at the same time, like historical inequalities and exclusion are still present. But at the same time, we're seeing how many organizations, committed governments, and officials are pushing through to ensure the inclusion of, in terms of gender, race, age, accessibility, something that is very important for people of our age. We really envision a world where, well, everyone is included and where everyone has the capability to contribute into society. That is the most important. And these organizations and governments, etc., and promoting citizens panels, participative budgets, and creating new opportunities. We're living this process of integration, etc. So we are seeing how borders are discriminating, and at the same time, like, are gaining more importance than ever. And maybe that's due to the lack of trust. Civil society is gaining space. Young people, we are demanding like more inclusion in governance and in every part of the world. And in general, I think that the citizenship is expecting leaders and politicians to build institutions that allow people to trust them, while also acting as role models for young people and helping everyone to build good and relevant leadership virtues. So in conclusion, the Youth Caucus feel that we are living in a world that is kind of difficult to understand, and sometimes, well, maybe citizens will even think, why should I trust because of all the things that are happening around me, shouldn't be being a bit full to trust when it seems that there are so many dangers. So we believe that we need to do like these citizens and officials like joint efforts to envision the world we want, to invest in these global co-creation efforts to include the vision of also the most desired communities, and to draw this new social contract that you were speaking about. And for us, governments and trust itself are the vehicles to achieve this. So, well, the Youth Caucus is very happy to have the opportunity to participate in this space, and well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivian. You remind us that at one time we were all young and we had aspirations, and we love your aspirations and your energy, and fear that there might be alienation and disenfranchisement. We depend on you to bring the youth along to be part of this activity that we're going to involve ourselves in. So thank you very much. Barbara Hoffman from Fixed Africa.
Thank you so much for having me here. This conversation is truly inspiring, and it's certainly happening at a great moment. Yeah, I'm Barbara from Fixed Africa, and we have a methodology called What It Looks Like When It's Fixed that aims to achieve a multi-purpose, multi-sectoral, multi-opinionated, multi-desirous partnership of all the people that make up communities within a municipality, and also with the municipality itself. And I think one of the things we've learned over the COVID years has been that almost everybody at the moment is living with quite a high level of anxiety, uncertainty, fear, grief, loss, and are faced with apparently unresolvable crises. So things that were left behind, it's not as though everything was going perfectly before COVID, but things that got left behind during the COVID times have certainly taken us backwards. And I think that if we want municipalities to be good partners, and that's what this conversation I think is really about, is how does the municipality offer itself as a good partner to achieve whatever is right for the city, in partnership with all those other stakeholders? Then how do we expect them to do that if we don't first look at what they themselves are facing, and we don't build their resilience alongside our own to actually be able to for instance, be transparent? I'm thinking about Durban, for instance, which was mentioned earlier, and how moving it has been to see the way that they have attempted to deal with homelessness. And I was speaking at one point with Namusa Shembe over a period where it rained continuously for 3 weeks. And the homeless shelters that they had created were all massive tents. And so suddenly the people who were working with the homeless were staring at this absolute new disaster with no idea of how to resolve it. And I think another one that is equally something that's just being left behind at the moment is how we personalize people's relationship with their environment, so that people begin to think differently about the way, for instance, that they create and dispose of waste, the way in which dumping happens in the city, and what impact that has on the city and our ability to actually deal with the apparently more pressing problems, but how that feeds in, for instance, and I'm sure Sri, you will be talking about this, but feeds into the inaccessibility of many cities for women. And once again, also issues of transport, that how transport makes women unreliable when it is unreliable. And so that means that women step backwards. And I know I've heard many debates about just how far backwards we've gone as women in cities during the time of COVID. And these things are not things that can be swept over. These things that are things that require relationship building. They require acknowledgement of just how difficult they are. and they require a deep commitment to building partnership and building relationships before we even manage to get to the point of being able to deliberate and move towards sharing arguments and creating ideas and then implementing them. And I think the other thing that COVID has taught us is that we cannot move from crisis to crisis and leave behind the crisis that was before in favor of a new crisis. However complex it may be, we need to embrace that complexity and move forward together in the firm acknowledgement of just how difficult it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I think you really hit on a theme that was articulated before, which is empathy. How do we have empathy on all sides for what what we're facing? And certainly we saw in the discussion of crisis and handling emergency crises, some ideas about this. And as we think about trust in government, I think we need to underline this idea of empathy along with integrity, transparency, accountability, and so forth. So thank you for contributing that to our conversation. And we look forward to working with you. Chris Williams from UN Habitat.
Thanks, Jeannie. A pleasure. And I really want to applaud the opening session that you organized. Philippe and Amelia, and particularly President Espinosa. I refer to her as president because she was the president of the 73rd session of the General Assembly. Once a president, always a president, particularly of the PGA. So really appreciate that you are spending your time on such issues with this group. It means a lot to me personally. And I think it would be interesting for you particularly to be in New York at this time, given the interest of your counterpart for the 76th session, who is seized with responding to the Secretary General's document that he presented in September last year, known as Our Common Agenda, which he was mandated to put forward by the 75th session of the General Assembly that requested the Secretary General to look at the next 25 years of the UN system, the future of multilaterals and big picture issues. And he took that mandate quite seriously and produced, with the rest of the UN system, a 76-page document known as Our Common Agenda. And if those on the call have not had a chance to look at it, I strongly encourage you to do so because it's available online. You can just simply Google Our Common Agenda. It's a bit of a long document, but it speaks very much to the issue of trust, the issue of a relationship between those who govern and those who are governed, the exercise of authority, accountability, future generations, public goods, our planetary ecosystem, and as is mentioned in this call, the concept of the social contract. I'd like to build on the concept of the social contract as envisioned by the Secretary General just somewhat, and I'd like to emphasize that our common agenda is simply a draft. It is open for consultation with member states, and the current president of the General Assembly has put forward a consultative process that will be organized according to 5 clusters. And one, I'm happy to acknowledge, Global Task Force on Local and Regional Government has been invited to discuss the issue of local governments and its relations with central governments as part of the aspiration of a more inclusive network multilateralism as envisioned by the SG. So the issue of the social contract, I think, is something that we need to unpack. Part of it is that discussion about trust. It's a relationship that each individual country establishes with its populace. And I think an important part of that, given the discussion we've had and given our interest in these issues, is the role of local governments. As we've said, they, and as President Espinosa had indicated, that's where the innovation's happening. That's where the creative juices happen. That's where revolutionary changes in working take place. So how can we glean from that and assert a more direct role, a deliberative role of local governments in the realization of a social contract? This should not be left to central governments alone. It is I think, a responsibility for central governments to work with local governments in ways that not only engender better cooperation between them, but also make sure that the social contract is in listening mode, and B, it's actually implementable. So I think this whole question of the social contract warrants perhaps a dedicated discussion at some point, Jeannie. and I would welcome participation in that. I wanted to use this moment to just indicate that there are two other things that are going on in this space that are very important, and Amelia is deep in this, and I don't want to embarrass her, so I will mention them because she really should be congratulated for a lot of this work. And that is the Secretary General has established a UN task force on the future of cities, where he is looking at and requesting the UN system to look at what are the institutional mechanisms that will allow local and regional governments to participate more directly and actively in intergovernmental processes. What are the ways to do that? How can the multilateral system open up to a degree where these energy and particular intelligence in terms of direct contact through subsidiary bodies to local citizenry, how can that be tapped to not only advance the social contract, but to make multilateralism more effective? So this task force has met several times and provided inputs to the common agenda at the request of the Secretary General. It is chaired by the Executive Director of UN Habitat and involves the Executive Office of Secretary General and about 20 UN entities. Very early, we reached an agreement with the Secretary General's office that we wanted to open up this space to include representatives of the Global Task Force on local and regional governments. So Amelia was kind and stepped forward and really orchestrated that. That contributed to the common agenda, a local government perspective. And it also has created the basis for the development of one of the suggestions or recommendations the Secretary General has put forward in the common agenda, which is the establishment of Secretary General's advisory group on local and regional governments, a body that he would establish to get advice and seek counsel from local governments and begin to pursue precisely these issues of trust and developing a social contract, as well as broader issues of managing our global planetary system and the other major issues of coming out of COVID and recovery that are required. But specifically on these issues of trust, I think it's quite relevant. There is a process by which Amelia and I are involved this week to try to look at developing a draft terms of reference through this task force that would would allow the Secretary General to have a reference point when considering how to establish an advisory group, and if so, when he might launch that based on the consultative process. The second, and I'll stop here because I could talk about these issues for hours, is the president of the 76th session has been requested by the General Assembly to organize on the 28th of April, high-level meeting of the General Assembly on the implementation of the New Urban Agenda. And as all of us know, the New Urban Agenda has local governments built into its DNA. It sees local and regional governments, their associations, city networks as one of the most important constituents of the implementation of the New Urban Agenda. So the president of the current General Assembly is organizing for that meeting and has decided to not leave it to the meeting, that he feels the issue of sustainable urbanization, the question of the role of local governments, the importance of implementing the New Urban Agenda is not well internalized by the international community and needs to be. So he has established an advisory committee on sustainable urbanization that he will preside over during the course of the 76th session. Could be something that his successor in the 76th session picks up, but for now, it's under this current president with a view to tackle many of the issues we discussed on this call. And to have member states under the leadership of the President of the General Assembly advance such issues is, as President Espinosa will tell you, unusual. And so it's encouraging to see that it's not just the Secretary General that's opening up spaces, it's also the PGA. So with those comments, sorry, very UN talk, but I thought it might be helpful to see some of the things that are happening at the global level, which this group is in many ways through the Global Task Force very plugged into, can serve as the support mechanism for these more granular discussions, which I think are essential in terms of how we advance trust in government. Thanks, Jeannie.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's really important to have this global to local discussion, and you've set the context very nicely. I would point out in the common agenda, which has a 12-point list of priorities, that number 6 is build trust, coming after number 1, leave no one behind, number 2, environment, protect our planet, number 3, promote peace and prevent conflicts, number 4, abide by international law and ensure justice, and 5, place women and girls at the center. So number 6, build trust. So we are certainly at the center of this conversation with the work that we will be doing, and making the links upward to the global issues and downward to the local issues is part of our mission. So let us turn now to Alberto Fernandez de Baja, the Senior Program Officer of International IDEA.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here representing International IDEA. We are always very happy to collaborate with UCLG and see a lot of organizations we usually work with and great organizations we don't usually interact that much together. I think the co-creation process is a fundamental trait that we need to embrace more and more, regardless of the topic we are working on. Let me just be very brief on certain issues that, from our perspective of International IDEA, we are observing that we believe is key in how trust is becoming a key aspect of the governance and the democratic governance of our societies. And I'm very happy, it's not a happy issue, but I'm very happy to see how the idea of the crisis of the social contract keeps raising. And this is a fundamental trait of where democracies are today. There is a crisis of a social contract in many democracies. This crisis is anchored in many different issues. One of them is a general feeling of incapacity of democracies to deliver. And that's precisely against the paradigm that we have been working with, in which democracies are actually the systems capable to deliver. If you all remember what in 2012 revolution in Tunisia, they will speak about bread and democracy. So they will link that capacity to deliver. Whereas what it seems to be the mood today, and say the mood because there is a lot of debate in academia if this is true or not. It's a general incapacity to deliver, but there's also a link to this, a crisis of relationship between citizens and institutions. The representative institutions are not acting as the transmission belt that they have to be between citizens and power. This is especially acute for political parties. They don't, they're not trusted by citizens. It is especially important for parliaments at all levels. They're not trusted by citizens. And that breaks a fundamental trait of democracy and democratic governance, which is that capacity to move the concerns, to aggregate and move the concerns of the population towards power. So power becomes responsive. So power can actually deliver based on the traits and desires and claims of the population. So there is a crisis of the social contract that is linked, it's not the direct cause, of course, but it's linked to raising authoritarianism. And this has fundamental implications for the capacity of local governments to act, but also even to exist. Authoritarianism is rising because democracies are losing quality and because authoritarian regimes are becoming more assertive and becoming more vocal of their models, and are becoming more capable as well of influencing outside their sphere of influence, which is sadly very important words today. Raising authoritarianism, both because authoritarian regimes are stronger and because democracies are losing quality, affects directly the capacity of local governments. Authoritarianism will, by principle, concentrate power. It will take away, in most instances, power from local governments. Authoritarianism also implies that government power is not shared by different entities, which again cripples the capacity of cities and regional governments to act and to be these catalysts of change and good governance. There is a third trait of the crisis that we are living today in terms of the social contract, which is communication and information about democracy. Canciller Maria Fernanda already touched upon this. we don't live in a world of fake news or filter bubbles. We actually know by research that those things are actually not happening that often as we think. What we have is a problem of the media and the media diet that a significant part of the population is having. This is not leading towards polarization. This is leading towards radicalization. And that is a problem, because when a part of society abandons the common agreements that sustain democracy, and they agree not to play by the rules of democracy, then democracy fails to function. If those common agreements don't work, democracy cannot function. If we don't agree on those common issues, it's impossible for democracies to renew the social contract and to deliver and to face the wave of increasing authoritarianism that we are suffering. This is a very green picture, I know, and this is a result of all of our research and data on how democracies are working. But at the same time, I want to raise the idea or support the idea that has been raised by various of the speakers of the importance of democratic innovations at the local level, and how those democratic innovations at the local level are key to start solving some of these problems, are key to increase trust in government. They're key to start rebuilding the social contract. They're also key to agree again on those common agreements that sustain democracy, the substance and the institutions of democracy. And they are key to link again government and power. We need power to be responsive, but we also need citizens to join and to relink to government. So I think the importance of democratic innovations at the local level cannot be stressed enough, and it should be one of the guiding lights that guide the building back better, as the UN Secretary General has put it. And I will, for now, leave it there.
Thank you very much. This for reminding us, of course, of the importance of innovation and the necessity to practice innovation. Someone mentioned earlier how cities are certainly a great laboratory for this. We need to take this into consideration, and how innovation for our social contract will advance our work. So thank you very much for that. Sri Sophia from Waru Commission.
Thank you, Jeannie. Good afternoon and good morning for some of you. It's very late here, joining from Malaysia. It's almost midnight, but I'm very excited. I represent the Huairu Commission. For those who are not familiar with the name or with the organization, it is a women-led social movement of grassroots group from poor, urban, rural, and indigenous communities in 42 countries around the world. And we work collectively for transformative change that improves the lives, condition, status, and quality of life of women, their families, and municipalities and the human settlements where they live. We have been entrusted to actually lead the feminist caucus, and I hear a lot, and I appreciate President Fernanda to mention that we need the feminist principle is key in this context of discussion, trust, and government. I think this discussion, when we talk about trust and government, the relationship between those who are governing the people and those who are being governed, that's where the trust is key. And I hear a lot, we mentioned about democracy and the relationship with governance. I think we need, maybe in this discussion, we need to also go back to in the early 2000s and late 1990s, the United Nations mentioned a lot about good governance, the principle of good governance. And I think we need to go back and revisit. And I hear just now that several of these principles have been mentioned: accountability, transparency, efficiency, effectiveness, and then participation. But what I've not heard is about rule of law. I think when we talk about trust and government, the rule of law, is something that is important, because sometimes, and in many cases, trust is eroded because there's no respect to the rule of law by both sides. Yeah, and trust is also a relationship between two parties. So in the Huairou Commission, the grassroots women have come up with a tool in building trust. They call the local to local dialogue. That's the tool that they use to build trust when they work with government entity, when they work with authorities. The other thing that I want to also bring up again with complement with others is the key to have equality and address and include the principle of equality in our social contract. I'm not going to go more than that, but I'm looking forward to work the Huairou Commission leaders, looking forward to work with all the town hall leaders and members in ensuring that the feminist perspective and principles are integrated and become the transformative principle that will make things happen. And with that, I think that's all for now. And in the future, we'll have more of the Huairou Commission leaders, and we'll also bring other feminist leaders that we work with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shri. And of course, thank you for reminding us of the importance of the rule of law, absolutely essential for everything that we do. However, we also have to consider how civil disobedience fits into all of this in building trust. So we've got lots of paradoxes to handle as we go forward. We would very much welcome seeing the tool that you've developed for our conversations as we go forward. Last but not least, we have the Accessibility Caucus, and I had announced earlier that Luis Artido was going to speak, but it turns out that we have Victor Pineda, so maybe they'll speak together or maybe they'll speak alone, but I'm going to turn the floor over to World Enabled.
Thank you so much, Judy. Once again, this has been a phenomenal process with so many colleagues being able to help shape a road forward. And I think that trust is the fundamental thread that holds the fabric of society together. I think previous speakers have given us both a philosophical and a practical framework by which this town hall process positions local government as the main actors towards an inclusive and sustainable future. From the Accessibility Caucus, I think it's important to understand three fundamental realities, which is that we come from a legacy of a normative approach to design, to public policies, and towards governance systems that have left in historically a lot of people out. And that is why together we shaped a sustainable development goals and a global agenda to really leave no one behind. That's the fundamental aspect of our collective recreation, reimagination of this social contract, as was discussed. Accessibility goes far beyond just ramps and addressing, elevators. It's really a fundamental conceptual and cross-cutting issue that gets to the root of democracy. which is, do you have a chance to be heard and to be seen, to engage? And what that means is that every single effort, initiative can create barriers to that participation, or can create facilitators to that participation. The disability rights movement has built its contributions to global governance off of the shoulders of feminism, off the shoulders of so many important contributions to what it means to have an embodied presence in a space that wasn't designed for you. So as we think about accessibility, whether it's understanding and prioritizing the elimination of physical barriers, understanding and prioritizing the elimination of social barriers, understanding and prioritizing the elimination of institutional barriers, we're really talking about agency, human agency. That's how we can understand individuals that live on the edges of that normative bell curve and start designing for people on the margins in order to make the human rights and dignities and opportunities much more salient and prevalent for also everyone in the middle. So really what we're talking about is understanding these, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as a document that supports the lives of everyone. We can all fall into having these accessibility needs in a matter of a second. That the 1 billion people that live with disabilities also are part of every other cross-cutting group. That's part of every other major group. So I think as the town hall process develops, the Accessibility Caucus will try to remind us how fundamental this issue is to building trust in government, and how foundational local governments are to implementing all of the inclusion targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, and fundamentally ensuring that this new social contract has the mechanisms through digital accessibility, through accessibility of information, through accessibility in the way that we create digital meetings, right? So that no matter if somebody has difficulty hearing, seeing, speaking, moving around, challenges with self-care, that there are mechanisms in place that unlock the human potential and eliminate those agency deprivations that erode the trust in government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor, for reminding us of the breadth of accessibility, that everyone needs to be seen and to be heard, that we have visible indications, but we also have invisible indications that we need to recognize. Your work with the New Urban Agenda and your contribution to the New Urban Agenda platform and the Abu Dhabi Declaration is certainly an indication of some of the work you've made in the world-enabled world, but it's broader than that. So thank you very much for reminding us of that, and we'll carry that forward. We have, I understand, the Deputy Mayor of Libreville here. Is that true? I think I see him in the image up there.
Oui, je suis là, oui.
Would you like to contribute anything? We're very happy that you're here and listening to this, and hope you would like to give us a message. I'm so that I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
Merci à vous tous. Bonjour depuis Libreville, le Gabon. Après toutes ces imminentes personnes et très importantes interventions, il est difficile de prendre la parole, mais nous allons quand même dire ce que nous pensions. Emilia, nous ne cesserons de vous féliciter pour cette initiative parce qu'elle a la capacité de mettre donc ensemble toutes ces intelligences, donc de mettre en œuvre le concept d'intelligence collective pour pouvoir construire ensemble le pacte de l'avenir. Alors, nous sommes vraiment d'accord avec tout ce qui a été dit. Simplement, nous voulons rappeler ici que si nous nous référons au contrat social paru en 1762 et écrit par Jean-Jacques Rousseau, il nous souviendra que le contrat social mettait comme objectif principal l'intérêt général. Et à partir du moment où l'intérêt général est mis en déséquilibre par rapport à des agissements ou par rapport à une organisation de la société, nous assistons effectivement à ce manque de confiance qui est en fait un manque de confiance à plusieurs niveaux et entre plusieurs acteurs. Et de ce fait, nous sommes convaincus que le moyen le plus sûr de pouvoir construire cette confiance est de se mettre ensemble dans des cadres bien définis, des cadres multiniveaux, des cadres multisectoriels, mais des cadres qui privilégient le dialogue. Parce que si nous n'arrivons pas à faire en sorte que déjà les gouvernants qui sont constitués de différents acteurs puissent être cohérents et conformes dans ce qu'ils font, si nous n'arrivons pas à faire en sorte que les jeunes ou la société, les acteurs de la société vers qui les politiques publiques ou les initiatives sont prises n'arrivent pas à comprendre le bien fondé d'une initiative ou alors n'arrivent pas à percevoir l'impact d'une décision, alors nous n'arriverons jamais à pouvoir co-construire ensemble cette confiance ou reconstruire cette confiance parce que nous pensons qu'elle a quand même existé à un moment ou à un autre. Et donc, nous pensons que le respect de la parole donnée, et Madame la Présidente le disait tout à l'heure, il faut pouvoir dire ce qu'on fait et faire ce qu'on dit. Ensuite, nous voulons penser que parce que personne ne doit rester de côté, nous voulons insister sur cette notion de droit à l'identité. En Afrique, il y a plusieurs centaines de millions de personnes qui n'existent pas de manière légale. Oui, elles sont en vie. Oui, elles grandissent. Mais dans quel cadre et dans quel contexte? Et à partir du moment où elles n'ont pas d'existence juridique, je puis vous assurer qu'elles sont plus enclins à pouvoir avoir des déviances dans la société et faire en sorte que justement cette méfiance ou ce déséquilibre de la société soit entretenu. Donc, Madame le secrétaire général Emilia, nous sollicitons que dans les droits humains défendus par le CGLU, nous puissions inscrire aussi le droit à l'identité en très bonne place. Et nous sommes convaincus, donc, à travers tous ces échanges, nous allons pouvoir, in fine, en arrivant à Daejeon, avoir des documents qui vont susciter l'adhésion du plus grand nombre pour que nous puissions donc aller de l'avant dans cette question de confiance et gouvernement. Voilà en gros ce que rapidement nous voulions dire depuis Libreville et encore merci, merci.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding us of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract. I've actually downloaded that and putting it into a folder for everyone. This issue of 100 million people not having an identity is not one that we had taken into consideration before, and something that we definitely need to explore, because if we want everyone to be heard and everyone to be seen, and we want to build trust, we need to address this issue. So we will pursue this with you and with others. Thank you very, very much. Now, I could do a second round on the panel, but I think at this point, it would be very wonderful to have some people who are listening to make some contributions. I know Tom DeLessio and Kathy Klein have sent me chats that they'd like to say something. Other people may have other things. If you raise your hand or in the chat, there's I believe it's in the chat. There's, oh no, in the reactions, there's a hand raising device that you can do. So I'll turn to Tom and then Kathy and then others whom.
I see Camila also, Ginny.
Excuse me?
I also see that Camila from No
Oh,
has.
yes, of course. Camila, who's working on your flagship report. So please, Camila, we'll have you come in after Kathy and Tom. Okay. Tom?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you all for a really enlightening conversation as we go through. The question I have is, to UCLG and to some of our experts on the question of, do we establish, and if we do, how do we establish guardrails on the conversations about trust as we're going through? And the reason I'm raising this is there was a fascinating program last night in America on public television where leading historians and social critics criticized the press for allowing anyone who basically had an opinion to say it on all sorts of issues, including democracy, COVID, et cetera. And the question then comes to my mind is, if we provide platforms for dangerous or for unsubstantiated information, how do we advance trust in government on that? And then the corollary question is, what do we do about elected and appointed officials who are espousing dangerous or unsubstantiated or incorrectly factual information going through? I'm the first person to believe in the First Amendment rights, the right of free speech, et cetera, going through. But at some point, how do we deal with all this? And then to layer one more question on top of that, there is, at least in America, and I'm seeing in other places, growing distrust of academia and intelligentsia. And so the question then comes to, as we go through, how do we actually get Americans and people around the world to recognize that sometimes we should be trusting our scientists and our academics and others more than the person who is in the supermarket or the gas station, et cetera. Thank you again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, we in the United States have a good deal of court legislation about what free speech is, but nobody has dealt with this misinformation topic that has been brought up several times. So we definitely will be addressing this in our work. Kathy, and then Camille.
Thank you, Jeannie. I'm madly taking notes, which I will share with everybody, because that's part of being transparent and accountable. And I appreciate Amelia and all of you for the huge amount of work you're doing. And I also appreciate that finally we're talking through our keynote speaker about power, because I have worked as a volunteer here at the UN in New York for over a decade, and we have tremendously wonderful ideas, but we don't seem to address the problem. What if our central leaders really privilege retaining their power and their colleagues' ability to probably corrupt the system instead of any implementation of what we're talking about? So I think that's a huge issue that we need to address, because unless we have honest public officials, I don't think the citizenry will have a reason to trust. And I did note, and I'm happy, Victor, to join you as we did. I'm the General Assembly of Partners co-chair for older persons, which works and will work together with disability groups more than World Enabled, although Victor is a pioneer in all that effort. But that means that I'm going to fight hard that we have to change the concept paper, and we have to change the exclusion of the growing aging populations in cities, because we have a lot to contribute, and we're working very closely with the World Health Organization, Age-Friendly Cities and Communities, and with UN Habitat. So we do want to contribute, not just complain. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Camille.
Thank you very much, Jeannie, and everyone for fantastic interventions. So yeah, I just wanted to share with you a few thoughts. I work at University College London, and we have been working over the last year and a half with the UCLG research team on putting together the next Gold report, the Gold 6 report that is going to be launched in this year World Congress of UCLG, that focus on issues of pathways to urban and territorial equality that undoubtedly has a lot of overlaps and interesting kind of synergies with the discussion that is taking place in the town halls. So the report, just to give you an idea, is going to be looking at pathways that local and regional governments take and can take to advance equality. And we have named those pathways actually active verbs, like commoning, caring, connecting, renaturing, prospering, democratizing, and undoubtedly each of those have a lot to say to the work that the town halls are doing. And we hope that the goal report can actually inform those agendas from the urban equality and territorial equality perspective. Because as both Maria Fernanda and Emilia highlighted, the trust and democratic deficit is a question of equality as well. And the equality question is undoubtedly a central aspect of this particular concern. So of course, the trust question overlaps across all these pathways, but probably the one that is more appealing and more clear in this connection is the pathway of democratizing that the report touches. And we have been doing this process over the last year with civil society organizations, UCLG committees, and academics, trying to kind of document experiences and research experiences in order to provide some kind of concrete tools for the development of this political agenda at UCLG. And just to give you two kind of insights on that hopefully can help for the conversation. One has to do with a kind of overall composite vision that we are starting to build across all the conclusions of the report that has to do with the importance for advancing equality in having a kind of renewed subnational governance culture, these competences, these capabilities that everybody has been mentioning, which actually promote broad local partnership, which is crucial to face these growing inequalities and the complex challenges that cities and territories are facing. And also it's crucial to reinforcing trust. And as many people have said already, this is not just about having capabilities for increasing participation or for like kind of decentralization and local elections, but this actually requires to engage with democratic innovations with a wide spectrum of what we call like democratic families of practices actually that actually redistribute power at the local level, and the possibility of local and regional governments as governments of proximity to do that is really more like a privileged position compared to many governance structures. So from mini publics or juries of citizens assemblies or participatory budgeting or participatory councils or the referendum civil society initiatives or collaborative governance that are more directed to co-produce services or the use of digital participation tools and civic technologies, there are hundreds of little new innovations technologies that can actually help to build trust at the local level and with the notion of proximity at the center. And finally, the second point, and with this I finish, is that this idea that there needs to be capabilities and competences at the local government to deliver all this is also about how local and regional governments can actually start support the capacities of groups themselves, of the groups that have been historically less recognized, and therefore probably they hold less trust towards traditional places of power, and how the actually local and regional governments can advance in all these things with capacities that are actually shared and with power that is actually shared. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of overlaps, and we're going to be publishing a series of working papers next month and like walking towards the final report in October, but I think it will be grateful to kind of find these synergies.
Well, for sure, there are tremendous synergies in what you're doing, and we can't wait to see these working papers. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Make observations, interventions?
I saw Victor just a moment ago. I don't know.
Is that a finger up there, Victor?
Thank you. I think the last couple speakers just reminded me that this is a very interconnected process, because the empowerment of one group, especially from the Accessibility Caucus, unlocks capabilities for many other groups. In the chat, I really want to recognize the leadership of Kathy Klein on older persons, understand the demographic shifts, sort of the benefits of the trust that can be unlocked when we make our systems and processes more accessible through those standards and approaches, policies and programs and policies, is that accessibility supports even migrants that are entering your city and might not speak the language very well, right? So you have captions, or you have a different way of providing text or content in a simpler manner. So I just want to ensure that everybody understands that we can unlock a lot more complexities a lot more trust, we can solve a lot more problems through this cross-cutting issue of accessibility, and also recognize that there's been quite a lot of other groups through the U20 process, through regional convenings of ministers on housing and urban development in Latin America, Minervi through the high-level political forum and the International Disability Alliance. So I think this trust issue is about weaving together those key elements where accessibility becomes an enabler, but also represents many, many, many groups beyond just persons with disabilities. The World Blind Union and the World Enabled and so many of other groups that have been advocating for this issue understand the linkages between older persons, migrants, the intersectional identity of gender and disability, or even the issue of these multiply marginalized challenges can be all addressed with just a few conceptual practical interventions that can be unlocked through this accessibility framework. And I want to really commend Emilia for her leadership in seeing that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. As we wind up this meeting, which has been extremely exciting, and thank you for all your contributions, everyone. I think we could at least write 25 PhD dissertations on this topic, but we're going to be only limited to about 20 pages in our policy document. And so what will we do? How will we get there? First of all, I think we've certainly uncovered the complexity of this topic, and we hope, I think, to present as we go forward a radical approach to thinking about trust and government. I would suggest that we might have a working title for this project, which might be the new social contract, Unlocking Trust in the 21st Century. If you're happy with that working title, we'll keep that working title. I can imagine that this document that we will produce will have various parts. It probably will have a part on theory very quickly, a part on principles, a part on practices, and then a part on implementation and solutions. I'm just suggesting this as a shape and a format as we go forward. Obviously, we will work together as a group to do this. And how are we going to work together as a group to do this? First of all, we have a deadline. Deadlines are very important. The deadline is the February 25th meeting of all town halls. And so we'll need to have a zero draft, at least by then, it seems to me. We have the 4 partners at the bottom of the screen here that you can see. And I suggest that this group of the 4 partners within themselves will form their own working groups within their organizations, and then we'll move forward to talk to among each other to create an executive committee that will then address and listen to not only the 4 partners, but the caucuses too, the representative of the caucuses. So it's not just 4, it's 7 entities will be the sort of executive committee that will go forward. Executive here meaning not to be exclusive, but to be inclusive, that the executive committee will have the responsibility of reaching out to their constituencies and making sure that the voices of all are heard. How are we going to do this? I'm going to talk to Pablo about how we're going to set up some sort of communications platform. We can use WhatsApp immediately, but it seems to me that there are probably other and better ways to do this. I would like to invite Maria Fernanda to be the honorary advisor and chair of this group, if you would accept. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm assuming that the representatives we've had here on the caucus will continue to represent their caucuses, and that the partner organizations will contribute. How can you, the other, I think we have 70 people on this call, and there's probably about 55 more people that we need to hear from. That's where we want to have some open hearings. We will structure this process so that we can open hearings. We'll set up a Google Doc so you can make contributions to the written piece, and we will go forward to meet our deadline by February 25th. At that point, I believe, Pablo and Emilia, it's a draft for everyone to discuss to improve that draft. Is that the process there, to have the conversations? If people have other suggestions about how you'd like to go forward, we are open. Let us know. Remember that, let's remember the basic principles of trust, which is about how does government exhibit its competencies and its values, its competencies in terms of delivering services and anticipating the needs of the future. How does it do it in a responsive and reliable way? And values, how do how do we make sure that there's integrity, fairness, and openness in all of the activities that are related to the relationship between citizens and government. And lastly, we're very happy to be able to contribute to the global conversation and to move forward the trust that we need to build between local governments and international entities and national governments. So that's another piece of our mission that we will be carrying forward. Observations? I'll turn it back to Amelia then.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. I think the methodology that you are proposing is really great, and I think you will be able to feel whether you need more or less open hearings. We are also going to enable this space where you will be able to exchange documents, etc. I mean, you are so versed in this gap is the living example of this kind of processes. So I have no doubt that we will be successful. One thing that I wanted to leave with you is also the thought that we might want other people to be involved in this conversation, and that's okay. We can involve more people. And there are no limitations as to how many voices we want to hear here. But obviously, those of you that have been invited to this process are organizations and people that we trust, that we have built this respect for in terms of how we work and the kind of recommendations that we deliver, and also that are available to facilitate such a complex processes with legitimate representation of partners. So I think it's important to keep this in mind, but it's an open floor, and we need to be open also, and sometimes to be provocative, to answer and address some of the concerns that Tom was also raising about how are we going to manage those groups that do not believe, for instance, in science, or how are we going to incorporate these questions that people have about politicians, elected officials that are not saying the truth. How do we address this? So I think those issues that have been raised by Tom are really very, very relevant. And we need to ensure that we have other voices maybe. And I know Tom has a background of media. We might need a specific session around media because it's coming up also with other town halls. So we will do, when we talk about the comments and what they imply, we will need to discuss that as well. So we will think about that and integrating that in the joint conversation of the town halls. We will look for those issues that are common to all of you, to all the town hall processes, and that would benefit from a joint discussion. Very inspiring overall. And I saw that we had also a raised hand that I don't see anymore from our colleague from Quito. Are you still there? Because sí.
Hola, hola.
Por favor, adelante. No quiero dejar a nadie sin tomar la palabra porque no tengo el privilegio de tenerles a todas juntas tan a menudo. O sea que por favor, adelante y muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros.
Bueno, primero extender un enorme saludo de parte de la vicealcaldesa Gisela Chalá, desde Quito, Ecuador. Bueno, había pedido un poquito antes la palabra, quizá ahora después de la metodología queda un poco suelto, pero me parecía que era súper importante transmitir este elemento en función de lo que hemos discutido y digamos, esta mañana tan gratificante con la cantidad de elementos que se colocaron. Y creo que una de las cuestiones que quizá me parece fundamental e indispensable y que, como lo comento, debería estar incluida, es quizá una de las partes más difíciles que estamos viendo dentro de los gobiernos locales y tiene que ver con la construcción de confianza entre ciudadanos. Y esto tiene que ver con lo que viven nuestros hermanos y hermanas que están en situación de movilidad humana. Y cuando estamos escuchando a la vicealcaldesa de Granville, que nos habla de tantos millones de personas sin identidad, también estamos hablando de esta enorme reflexión y esta cuestión que debe estar incluida en este nuevo contrato social, ¿sí? En ese sentido, me parecía que necesitamos enfrentar esta situación de un enorme crecimiento de xenofobia, aporofobia, racismos, que enfrentan todos nuestros hermanos y hermanas que están en movilidad humana y que ha generado una desconfianza terrible entre propios, ¿sí? Creo que ese es un enorme reto y por lo tanto creo que este nuevo contrato social debe reflexionar sobre esta ciudadanía universal, generar estas respuestas de los gobiernos locales, que es complejo, y hablar pues de algo que me parece que es indispensable y que ha sido como el centro de esta mañana, que es la solidaridad, la confianza y la empatía. Un contrato social en donde el centro es el ser humano, la función social y ambiental de las ciudades no puede olvidar a los que están en movilidad humana. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, María Augusta. Realmente siempre es un gusto teneros con nosotros y esas líneas de pensamiento que nos dan nuestro liderazgo y que además son lideresas que acompañan también el proceso del caucus de los jóvenes, son verdaderamente muy importantes. Me encanta que traigas a colación la cuestión de ciudadanía universal, porque es algo que estamos intentando definir y abrir, ¿no? en las discusiones internacionales. Con un mundo tan variopinto no es tema fácil este, pero creo que los gobiernos locales ahí definiendo su papel de actor político, ¿no? y de la defensa de sueños y ambiciones de las comunidades, como siempre decimos, tienen un papel muy importante a jugar. Quiero decir que no saben el privilegio que es tener ciudades como Monterrey, que nos está siguiendo hoy en todas las discusiones, nuestras amigas de Quito, nuestras amigas de Libreville, nuestro liderazgo, al fin y al cabo, como representantes de redes, significa que vamos por el buen camino como organización y que estamos ahí uniendo todas las piezas de este puzzle, que son complejas de encajar, pero que creo que estamos encontrando por lo menos una gran mesa donde poner todas las piezas, identificarlas y comenzar a co-crear juntos. También agradecer mucho la reflexión que se ha hecho sobre los procesos de Naciones Unidas. Agradezco mucho a Chris Williams esto. Ustedes saben que CGLU es la facilitadora del Global Task Force. And as facilitator of the Global Task Force, we are trying to ensure that the voices of all the organizations that represent local and regional governments globally are heard. And we are ensuring that we have members of the Global Task Force represented in the processes that Chris was describing. As a matter of fact, we have an important meeting tomorrow to think together about how to shape this advisory group that has been proposed by the UN Secretary General, answering to our prayers and hopes for many years as movement. So all of those thoughts, all of these ideas, but also some of these critical gaps that we need to address. Some of the difficulties around hard topics such as corruption, which will need to be addressed by this group as well, and new forms of participatory democracy, moving from participation to deliberation, like Philippe was saying, will need to inform our pact for the future. And I think you are the right people to bring all these hard topics to the discussion with our political leadership and with the other councils. But please, again, don't hesitate bringing others to the table if you feel we need to do that. Maria Fernanda is saying to me that she does not want to address the group again, but I think it would be a pity if we don't make sure that we have her views. It's a luxury to have you with us. And Jeannie, after Maria Fernanda, if you have any other issues that you would like to raise, please be my guest. María Fernanda, perdón por no hacerte caso, pero es siempre un gusto tenerte con nosotros y creo que amerita que tomes de nuevo la palabra.
Thank you, Emilia. I was saying that we cannot have a better closing than what you were just saying and what Jeannie mentioned in terms of clarity about the roadmap, about the methodology, and how we're going to continue to work together, which I'm very much looking forward to. And perhaps the discussion has been so rich. I have pages and pages of notes that I have taken, but perhaps a little bit of a takeaway is the importance of trust building among citizens and between citizens and governments at all levels and democratic institutions at the local, but also at the international level, as being a part and parcel of the Building Forward Better exercise. In the current emergency multiple crisis situation. The trust building should not be, an afterthought. It has to be at the center, at the core of our efforts to strengthen and revitalize our democracies at all scales and level. Checklists, to-do lists. We have hundreds of incredible ideas, starting for a core set of values that have to be, considered as we deliberately rebuild trust. So it's been really an incredible trip, a very rich discussion. I would like to, in particular, thank Christopher for bringing us through the sometimes very complex and very confusing path of our common agenda, the implementation, the consultation processes, intergovernmental spaces to discuss. It is a true privilege and a guarantee to have Emilia and UCLG take part of the task force and the consultation process, but perhaps we can bring together the Pact for the Future, the Reinventing Democracy, together with the UN reform process under the umbrella of our common agenda. So thank you for this amazing conversation and dialogue today, and very much looking forward to embarking in the process and the roadmap that Jeannie so eloquently shared with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President, as Chris was saying. And Jeannie, any additional thoughts from your side? I think we are ready to get started with the process.
No further thoughts other than onward, and that I've collected all the documents that were referred to today in a folder. So I give everyone an assignment to read the documents in the folder. Ever a professor. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Take good care, everybody. Please stay healthy. Thank you for joining us. And this is only the beginning. There are many more coming, many more discussions and concrete recommendations. Thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.